Hey guys, this is my first guitar lesson. Right here I'm using an app called Explain Everything. This is one of the cool tool options. This is my first time using it, so you're going to have to bear with me. But I'll write a review on it when I'm all done, and if I like it I might keep using it. Before we get into learning the guitar, there's a few music fundamentals I want to show you guys. It's just to help along with the learning process. What I've written here, this is the musical alphabet, also known as the chromatic scale. And each note in this scale represents a different pitch. Okay, for instance, I have my guitar on me here. I'm going to play an A note here, and now I'm going to play an A sharp note, and now a B note, and now a C. Okay, so you can see how moving to the right, the pitches get higher as you move on, and then to the left, they will get lower. The next thing I want you to know is something called an enharmonic note, which is a note that is spelled out differently, but it pretty much means the same thing. For instance, I'm going to take my pen here. A C sharp note right here is going to be the same thing as a D flat note. Okay, or a D sharp is going to be the same as an E flat. Right? F sharp is the same as a G flat, and G sharp is the same as an A flat. So those notes, although they look different, they play the same exact pitch. You're going to hear the same sound. Just for thoroughness, this is a B flat here where the A sharp is. There is a context when you would use one or the other, but for the scope of these lessons, I don't think it's that important. Another good thing to know is that the scale just repeats. So after G sharp, it doesn't end. It just goes on to another A in a new octave. Same thing with the A here on the left. It just goes to a G flat, an A flat, or a G sharp, and an octave underneath that. The next thing to know is something called intervals. And all an interval is the distance between two different notes. Okay, and the units that we use for intervals are called half steps and steps. Okay, a half step is just the distance between two notes here. So B to C would be a half step, which I'm going to use as an H. Okay, so B to A sharp would be a half step down. C to C sharp would be a half step up, right? And then a whole step is two half steps. For instance, if I wanted to go to E to F sharp, that's a whole step. Or if I wanted to go to F sharp to G sharp, that would be a whole step. Let's say if I wanted to go to C all the way to D sharp, that's three half steps, or a step and a half. And now that we know what intervals are, we can use those intervals to use different formulas to make different scales. Okay, every scale and every chord is based on a different formula. And once you know them, you can revert back to the chromatic scale that you see up here in red, and break into those and get scales out of them and get chords out of them. For example, those W's and H's that I put down stand for whole steps and half steps. Okay, and once we use those and plug those into the chromatic scale, we're going to get a major scale out of it. And I think everybody knows what a major scale is. That's the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale. For instance, on my guitar I can play an ascending major scale, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then descending. And what I did was I used the formula to make that major scale. So for instance, if I started on the note C, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to start at the note C, and then I'm going to plug in the formula to get a C major scale. So I'm going to go a whole step, and then I'm going to go another whole step to E. Then I'm going to go to half step to F, a whole step to G, another whole step. So I'm going to go past the G sharp to A, another whole step to B, and a half step back to C. So now I have my major scale, and since I started on C, it's going to be a C major scale. So let's take it. I'm going to take all the notes that I use: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back to C. Alright guys, so I took the notes out of that formula, and it's supposed to be an arrow, sorry, and I made it into what we now have a C major scale. Okay, so I'm going to grab my guitar one more time, and I'm going to start on a C note, and I'm going to play through the C major scale. And those are my two C notes, the octaves apart. Okay, so that's the formula to make any major scale. If I wanted to make an E major scale, I would just start on the letter E and then run through this same formula right here. And then the notes that I got out of that, that would make my E major scale. That would start, you could do it with any note for any key. If you wanted to make a B major scale, start on the note B and then, plug in that formula. The notes that you get out of it becomes your B major scale. The cage system, the system that I'm going to be teaching you about on the guitar, kind of lets you bypass all this stuff. You don't have to memorize any of the formulas. All you have to do is memorize a couple shapes and patterns on the guitar, and then that kind of does the work for you. I'm just showing you this here just so you can get an understanding of what's going to be going on. And what I have written down here is the major chord formula. The same way we use formulas to make scales, we use formulas to make chords too. So for the C major scale, I put little numbers on top. C is 1, D is the second note, E is the third, and then all the way to the C, which is the 8th note or octave. And I put a 1 in parentheses because you can start over at 1 too, or 1 also. And the formula to make a major chord is you take your root note, is your your root note, which is your 1. You take your third note, which is your E, and you take your 5th note, which would be a G here. So a C major chord, I call it a C major chord because C is my root, my 1, would be C, E, and G. So if I play those notes at the same time, I get a C major chord. For instance, I've got a C note here, an E note here, and a G note here. And if I play them at the same time, that's a C major chord. It's just something to know here. You can play those notes in any order that you want to. You're always going to get a C major chord as long as it contains those 3 notes. Okay, those are called chord inversions. For instance, if I wanted to play the E note first, and then a G note, and then a C note, that's also a C chord. That's just a different inversion of a C chord. Okay, just because they're not in the right order doesn't really mean it's not a C chord. As long as I have a C, E, and G in there somewhere, it's going to be a C major chord. Okay, it may make the chords sound a little different, but and it took me a long time to wrap my head around that it's the same chord, but it sounds different. But that's kind of how it works. But I think as far as the music theory goes, like I said, you guys don't need to know any of this to get into the system that we're going to learn. Knowing the shapes and patterns that I'll teach you lets you bypass all of this. I just wanted you to get a little knowledge of what's going on. My second thing, this is what I do want. Alright guys, this is my really shabby diagram of a set of guitar strings. The notes on the left are the notes that are played when you pluck or strum each string without them being fretted. For instance, that thick string on the bottom that says E, that's the low E string. So when you pluck or strum that string without it being fretted, it plays an E note. Okay, and the same goes for the rest of those strings as well. It's good to memorize what the note names are because I especially like to refer to them as those note names as opposed to like first string, second string, third string, so on. I might say, you got to put your middle finger on the D string on the 3rd fret, or your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the A string. So that's, what I like to refer to the notes as. So it's good to have these memorized. Make your own mnemonics or do whatever you got to do. But try to get them memorized. And hopefully for the next lesson, we're gonna have a guitar and we'll be ready to play. So hope you guys learned a little bit, and we'll see you next lesson. Thanks, guys.